Hi, welcome everyone to the Wavelength series, which is a partnership between VCUarts, VCU Cutter, and ICA in Richmond. So this series is going to include 12 lectures over the course of this academic year. And each of those lectures will be broadcast like this so that our partners in Doha, also here in Richmond, and a larger public can all participate, but also students will have a specific engagement that happens later on in the week. So they're all online due to the pandemic, but this allows us to bring different people together in a new way. So I just wanted to thank, first of all, the directors of the three institutions, Dominic Wilsden, who's the director of the ICA, Dean Burbidge of VCU Cutter, and Nancy Scott, who was the interim dean of VCUarts until today, and to welcome our new dean, Carmenita Higginbottom, who starts today. So thanks also to the co-organizers, Isabel St. Louis from VCU Cutter in Doha, and Stephanie Smith, the chief curator of the ICA, who the three of us have been working on this series together. Our next lecture is going to be September 29th with an artist named Christine Sun Kim. All of the lectures happen at 12 p.m. Richmond time and 7 p.m. Doha time. Raven today will speak for about 45 minutes about his work, and then we're going to have a Q&A for about 15 minutes. So feel free to use the chat function to sort of connect with one another and to make general comments. But the Q&A function in Zoom will be the main space that we're going to be collecting questions. So you can populate that throughout the run of the lecture, and then I'll use that as the basis for the Q&A at the very end. So on to Raven. So I'm really happy to welcome Raven back, even virtually, to VCU. Raven was here in Richmond, I think 3 years ago, to give a lecture in conjunction with the sculpture department. I first met Raven when he was still part of the artist collective Post Commodity, which was invited to participate in a project called New Cities, Future Ruins in Dallas in 2016. And I still remember this incredible performance that sort of played us all out. Raven Chacon is a composer, performer, and installation artist from Fort Defiance, Navajo Nation. As a solo artist, collaborator, or with Post Commodity, Chacon has exhibited or performed at the Whitney Biennial, Documenta 14, Red Cat, Musée d'Art Contemporain de Montreal, at the San Francisco Electronic Music Festival, Chaco Canyon, the End Time Festival, the 18th Biennial of Sydney, and the Kennedy Center. Each year, he teaches 20 students to write string quartets for the Native American Composer Apprenticeship Program. He's the recipient of the United States Artist Fellowship in Music, Creative Capital Award in Visual Arts, and the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation Artist Fellowship, and the American Academy Berlin Prize for Music Composition. He lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Toronto, and he's streaming in from Albuquerque today. So please welcome Raven Chacon.
Thank you, Noah, and thank you, VCU, for having me again. I'm really excited to be able to do this again and show work that's different than what I showed last time. And it's kind of funny, you think about what you're going to put into the PowerPoint, and you think about new work, and I completely have lost all sense of time during COVID. I don't know how many months have gone by, to be honest with you. Sometimes it feels fast, and sometimes it feels like I've been, locked up. So bear with me. And I also am not a Zoom expert. I don't know anything about Zoom or screen sharing. So I'm figuring this out today. But let me fire this up. And so, as Noah was explaining, a lot of my work is as a composer. That's most of what my work is. and uh, and a good portion of the work is also realizing sound as sound installations or as performances. A lot of my early work was just putting notes on paper for musicians to read, classically trained musicians. And at the same time, I was also building instruments, building electronic instruments. I was trying to make listenable instruments, but they ended up being quite noisy, and I didn't realize there was a whole community of people making noise music. And that's where I kind of fell into that kind of crowd of people doing that kind of thing. And you know, of course, there was a lot of ideas for works that didn't translate to the stage or to the recording formats, so they ended up being sound installations. And so I want to show an early work. The works I chose today, I chose them because of things that are happening today in the country and all over the world, and things that we're noticing differently because of this isolation. So this was a piece I wrote in 2001, so 19 years ago. I wanted to give myself every limitation I could for making music. So eliminating the options of something like volume and pitch and timbre and tuning to some extent, and leaving only a parameter of rhythm and maybe speed. And the instrument I chose to give me this limitation was firearms. So I notated a piece for guns, for revolvers, semi-automatic handguns and rifles, and 2 shotguns. And for obvious reasons, but maybe not the most obvious reason, it took a while to get this one performed. And it wasn't because there wasn't a venue to do this. My intention was always to do this outdoors. I think more so it was the people, finding the right people who could read notated music to perform this, but also had a familiarity with shooting. And of course, I didn't want it to be just a bunch of dudes, a bunch of drummers or percussionists, which is what ended up happening in the early days of me trying to recruit people to perform this piece. Later on, I found an ensemble I was happy with to perform this, and that's when I turned this into a video work. It was quite loud, so if you're on headphones, be well. Oh, shoot. What happened? Sorry about that. One, two, three, four. So this this composition goes on for quite a while. There's 3 movements to that work. And what I wanted to do was not necessarily make a anti-gun or pro-gun statement there. I wanted to raise more questions than maybe were answered in the work. One of those being, you know, what are these folks shooting at? Where are they? You know, are they in defense of something, or you know, in offense and maybe attacking? Are they hunting? What exactly are they doing? And it's never quite revealed in the video, or I suppose in a live performance of this. And you start wondering about each of the players who are also engaging in this. So I keep coming back to this piece, especially as the debate and discussion goes on in this country about, you know, the rights to have this weapon or this tool or this instrument. And you know, it gets more and more complicated when you start to ask, well, who can have this? Who has access to this? And for myself, that was what I hoped the piece would bring up, is that kind of question. And a similar kind of idea, I had another piece that was back in 2010 called Drum Grid. And this was for a series of drummers, a dozen or more drummers, to be dispersed in a neighborhood. And what happens in this piece is a different person with a drum is positioned on a corner of an intersection around a city or a neighborhood. And in this case, here you see a map of a neighborhood in Albuquerque, where I live. And what happens is a kind of broken telephone game of different hits, drum hits, cycling around the neighborhood, starting with one hit, and the drummer down the block hears or sees this hit and replicates that, and so on, as it loops all the way around and continues until something interrupts it. So this piece, I wanted to really innocently bring music into the outdoors, into public spaces, into neighborhoods, but soon realized that this would get interpreted as some kind of protest, some kind of action. And what always happens is some kind of interaction with the public, with people walking on the street, with people who might be living on the same block as a drummer who is positioned there. And so it does kind of alter the music as you have these interactions of people speaking with the drummers, trying to interrupt them, encouraging them. Any number of things can happen in this work. So I've done this many times. This is a screenshot here of 16 performers doing this in Oslo, Norway. And here's a video of this work, just to get a sense of how it sounds, you know, the sonic representation of this piece. As Noah mentioned in the introduction, for 10 years I was a member of a collective called Post Commodity. which had an ongoing membership of various indigenous artists, all of us based in the Southwest at the time. And I want to talk about the biggest project we ever did, or probably the biggest project the collective will ever do. I left the collective 2 years ago to focus on other works, but the project we did still has some relevance and discussion today in this ongoing discussion of the US-Mexico border. It was a work we did called the Repellent Fence, and what you see here is a object called a scare eye balloon. What it is a commercial bird repellent product, about 10 inch in diameter, and you're supposed to put it in your tree to scare away pigeons, and it doesn't work. We did some tests, we tried to put them up, and it didn't work at all. But we had this idea that if a 10-inch diameter balloon could scare away pigeons, maybe a 10-foot diameter balloon could ward off Western civilization. So we had these giant ones manufactured and staged these interventions, guerrilla interventions, in downtown Phoenix, just to see what would happen, these kinds of tests, to see how the public would react, again, maybe in line with the drum grid, see if people were interpreting this as some kind of very odd protest. More than likely, it was confusing folks rather than, scaring them away. But at the same time, maybe it was scaring away any kind of discussion they might have. It might shut down conversations as much as provoke conversations, depending on who was interacting with it. And so this shot here is a picture of a balloon flying very close to Sheriff Joe Arpaio's jail and office. Sheriff Joe Arpaio was the notorious sheriff of Maricopa County, who was very anti-immigrant, very anti-prisoner, making, I don't even want to go into it, but having all kinds of inhumane conditions for people as they were detained. And we started making more and more of these balloons just to start interacting with, corporations. This was staged in the Manitoba Hydro building in Manitoba, Canada, a corporation which manages the water for that province. And all of this was practice for what we were really trying to do with this, which was make a large land art installation called the Repellent Fence. The Repellent Fence was planned as a 2-mile-long border intervention of 26 of these balloons running north to south and bisecting the US-Mexico border, and therefore suturing these two sections of the land together. Originally, we were planning to do this in very rural locations, as you see here in a mock-up, or very early mock-up, that we wanted to trace natural land formations, so riverbeds, mountain ranges, to show that the land is uninterrupted despite the border wall being there. And no matter what structure the border wall would take, no matter what form, that there was always going to be nature which would mask or dwarf this wall. But the more and more we were looking for sites to do this project, we realized that there are strong communities along the border towns like Nogales, Arizona, and Sonora, other places like there's a town Naco on the south of the border there. People who are interrupted by this wall and by the bureaucracy and the policy of both countries, and of course mainly the United States. We also realize there's communities on that border that are vigilante, racist, anti-immigrant communities, and also of course the cartel work that happens down there. What eventually happened was we found a very beautiful and very supportive community of Douglas, Arizona, and the sister city, Agua Prieta, Sonora, who invited us to stage this project there. So the project began as a land art guerrilla intervention. It became much more of a community engaged collaboration. And in doing this, what we started realizing is not only was the land being interrupted, or an attempt at interrupting the land, and of course the people on both sides, but also a long history of indigeneity and tradition between people who live on south of the border and people on north of the border. One of those communities is the Tohono O'odham Reservation, which is a land that's recognized, tribal lands that are recognized both in the United States and in Mexico. And as we were in Douglas, we started learning more about that local history of a tribe called the Opata, which the descendants still live in that community. And the Repellent Fence, as we were putting it up, became this 4-day, what we call 4-day Reimagine ceremony, this opportunity to tell stories for the community to come together and to have a shared experience around this installation. And so I wanted to talk about this because I think there's going to be some, there's actually a film that documents the process of making this installation. And I just saw that Art 21 is doing a episode that has this project inside of it. And so I wanted to revisit it, especially in this time where earlier in the year, there was some attention paid to the ICE detention camps on the border, and where you were seeing families and children being detained and forgotten about. And since COVID hit and all of the other urgent matters of justice, it seems that we have forgotten that is still ongoing, this detention that is taking place. And so I wanted to speak about this piece again. There's more shots of the balloons as they are tethered there. Since leaving Post Commodity, I've decided to get back to making scores, writing for classical musicians. I like writing for that group of people, but I also like writing scores for non-musicians or people who don't consider themselves professional musicians. Perhaps people who might not read music notation, classical Western music notation, but there still needs to be some kind of organization in getting these folks together to play music. So since the beginning of my practice, but something that I've started up again is making these graphic representations, which both function as musical scores, but also might have a narrative embedded in them. So I began this series called American Ledger. And what the American Ledger series does is try to speak about events in US history. And so this is a piece, this was the first one, and this American Ledger 1 is to be displayed as either a flag, a wall, a billboard, a blanket, or a door. And the score is read from top to bottom, much like a standard Western musical classical score. And this is for any sustaining or percussive instruments. And so, well, this is too long to go into. Line by line, it chronologically details such things as encounters of indigenous people and Europeans, but the building of cities, the introduction of slavery into this country, the policing of that, the policing of people, the inequity of those rights, and the kind of attempt to rectify that, commerce, and things like assassinations, religion, and different laws that have been enacted in the country. Number 2, American Ledger number 2, I based off the Oklahoma flag. I wanted to make a piece about that area of the country. Oklahoma being a place that was to be a Indian territory where they relocated tribes, a lot of them from the South, and moved them over to that area. Of course, it didn't really remain a sovereign Indian territory. It ended up becoming the state of Oklahoma. So I wanted to model the number 2 score after that flag. And, further in Oklahoma's history, Tulsa's history, was an event called the Tulsa Massacre, the Tulsa race riots. And what this was an event in 1921 where you had Black Wall Street, and you had the white community there not allowing that kind of success to happen in that community, and ended up not only burning down the entire neighborhood, but then also massacring many people. So what this score does is function as a series of interactions, a cycling of entering and exiting the performance area, lighting matches, hitting snare drums, blowing police whistles, blowing train whistles, and having this kind of this system of equity where you're passing drumsticks amongst each other to participate, but also to get out of the circle. I have a video here that I'd like to share of the performance, a bit of the performance of this. This score can be presented as a flag, a billboard, railroad debris, or any pyrographed object sourced from the region. And so when we did this piece, it's only been performed once, and it was performed in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the Greenwood District neighborhood where much of the massacre took place. And what you're seeing there is the performance taking place in front of the billboard where the score was affixed to. And the performance took place in the parking lot of the Oklahoma Eagle newspaper building, which was a Black newspaper early in the 20th century. The most recent project that I did, which unfortunately got shut down halfway through its run due to COVID and the quarantine, was an opera called Sweetland. Over the past 3 years, I've been writing an opera in collaboration with the composer Du Yun, and also in collaboration with an opera director named Yuval Sharon, who is known in Los Angeles for putting on these wild experimental operas. One of the ones that he put on years ago took place in different vehicles driving around the streets of LA, and the singers were in the car with you, whether it's a limousine or a minivan. It turns out that all of these narratives and experiences and storylines were intersecting on the streets of Los Angeles. What Sweetland is about is very simply, as you watch this opera, which takes place entirely outdoors in downtown Los Angeles, just north of Chinatown, is an encounter between two groups of people, one of them labeled the hosts and another labeled the arrivals. I guess if you wanted to simplify it or, think of an analogy of that, it might be the Pilgrims of Plymouth Rock and the native people of the East Coast. And in fact, this project started off as an idea around the anniversary of Plymouth Rock. I can't remember what anniversary that is. It's not my section of the country. But anyway, this opera is not about that. It's about any of these encounters that might have taken place in North America or amongst indigenous people and arrivals. For myself and my history and my homeland where I live in, it might be the Spanish coming up and encountering the Pueblo people in this area. Nonetheless, what happens in this opera is one of two things. They say, the arrivals say, we're hungry. And they say, we're here. We don't necessarily need to live where you are living. What's over that hill? Can you show us what's beyond? And so the opera splits. The audience diverges into two different side operas. One opera telling this story that's not too different than maybe the myth of the first Thanksgiving, where people are fed, people are, introduced to a tribe, and in the course of this feast, a forced marriage takes place. So you see this event happen as the myth has been taught to us, in school. And what happens in this opera is you see the same scene a second time after an intermission. And it is completely whitewashed. It is, not only is it similar to what maybe you saw in school, but all of any semblance of what might have happened is erased. And similarly on the other side of the track, where you have this idea of, what might have happened as settlers went west, but after the intermission, you're seeing this complete taming of the land, as if nobody had lived there. And so the entire opera, in a way, erases itself, whitewashes itself as you watch it. Characters end up missing, things get redacted, sets not quite of a resolution, but this bit of apocalyptic scenario of showing a future where you have mixture of people, you have cities taking on a different landscape. So here you have the final scene staged right up to the metro line in downtown Los Angeles. What we wanted to show was a work of fiction, but also a work about fiction, about the mythologies of the way that the country had formed. Conflating, somebody who might be Lewis and Clark or John Smith or some kind of cowboy, in the Old West. Some heroes that we were taught were, settled the country. Three outdoor stages were built and taken down after 2 weeks. The original run was supposed to last for a month. Inside of this myth is further myth, creation stories, characters from indigenous creation stories, coyotes, wendigos. And I want to show a brief bit of this work also. We have, because we had to shut down the production, it is now online. The opera is called Sweetland, and we were able to film a version of it so that folks could see this, who weren't able to come to the performance.
ask how to write a boat without oars. If I could find my father, I'd ask how to shut a house without doors.
And so I wanted to show this work also just because it's almost a part of a series where I'm wanting to consider these different moments of American history, what is called manifest destiny, and maybe dispel this myth that these encounters happen from east all the way to west, or that they were one single event, and also that who was involved. It was, of course, many different tribes that encountered different settlers, different encroachers. And so what this opera does is give you a sense that all of this is mashed together in some way. It's not trying to resolve that or give a history lesson necessarily. In some ways, even that scene there might read like a cartoon, like a very, quick collage between so-called mythology and creation story and an attempt at a history lesson. This is the most recent project. I just finished this one actually, and it just opened in an exhibition at the Renaissance Society on Saturday. This is American Ledger number 3, and this one is a dedication to a journalist, an activist, a woman named Ida B. Wells, who lived at the turn of the century and is known for bringing attention to the lynchings that were happening in the South. And as she was unable to bring this awareness while she was living in the South, she moved up to Chicago and continued to give lectures, to print newspapers, and to try to bring attention to what was happening down in the southern part of the country. At the same time, in the North, while they were a bit more receptive to that, also did not truly either take her seriously or take serious the lynchings that were happening. So she ended up having to go to England to give these lectures and speeches on the conditions of Black people in this country. And so I wanted to make a piece about that work that she was doing, documenting lynchings, and also this kind of discrepancy that is evident in the south of the country, but also the north, where you have this urge to voice truth and relay information to the public, but at the same time having it get covered up by other noises, having different different power behind that action, and also acknowledging the audience, a listener who might be receiving this information. And so this is a piece for 2 women's choirs on opposing sides of a street to recite text. And also there's other symbology in here, like American Ledger 1, speaking to the conditions of people around the country, Black folk in the country, where maybe we're considered 3/5 of a person to vote. Other symbols such as commerce and other ideas of this kind of violence accelerating into present day. So the way this piece is, again, like the other 2 in the series, can be presented as a flag, and the scores also exists as a newspaper. So inside of this newspaper for American Ledger 3 is the instructions of how to perform the score, And I've also included something I call a new red record, which is similar to Ida B. Wells' work, where she was documenting lynchings that were taking place. This section in this newspaper, a new red record, documents all of the people who have died at police or vigilante hands during this time of quarantine. And that's where I'm at. That's everything I've got up to now. So thank you.
Thanks, Raven. I'm just going to pull up a couple of questions. So everyone can feel free to populate the Q&A now. One question is that in these first two pieces, they say, I see an interactive nature to your music. How does this interaction to your environment or to unexpected listeners compel you as an artist?
Well, you know, it kind of started in a funny way, making experimental music. You have a concert and you get ready to go play and do this concert and nobody shows up, you know, and so you just play for the other musicians or yourself, you know. I think years of doing that, you started thinking about shared experiences and, you know, what can happen when the music is just for the people involved, you know. At the same time, then when I started doing things, well, then part of me said, why put these formal concerts together? Why have something up on a stage? Even classical music, it's like this very kind of formal event, and started considering, well, this could happen anywhere, you know. If fidelity isn't a concern, and maybe silence either, you know, isn't, or quiet conditions aren't a concern, then really these things can take place anywhere. So I think for myself, that was, to answer this question, that was a huge breakthrough in thinking, well, maybe then there's an opportunity to do this outdoors, to do something site specific, to respond to a place. Maybe the meaning of the piece or the context is going to change depending where this takes place. So whenever we do this drum grid, it's really interesting to see all of the differences, you know, in the communities that this can take place. I get invited to do this a lot with universities and music departments, and we do it in the vicinity of, you know, these university neighborhoods where usually students and faculty live, but you know, it's always a surprise, you know, who else lives in these areas. So it's that kind of thing, you know, compels me to always keep the piece fresh and exciting, and not knowing what's going to happen when it's performed.
And I'm wondering a little bit about context in terms of like fields, you know, so you, as you mentioned, like you worked within a kind of contemporary art field, which deals with like, you know, visual art or material practices, but obviously contemporary art can be quite expansive, to be more experimental and performative. But on the other hand, sort of the world of music and the world of opera, I'm wondering how you find your practice moves differently in these different spaces.
Yeah, it's kind of the answer to that might be like I was just saying. When I was doing this kind of work in classical music contexts, you know, more kind of experimental contexts, formal Western music concerts, I just didn't feel like that was the audience for this kind of thing, or that they were understanding why I was doing them. Some of the works that I've made, I'm not even interested in how it sounds. You know, I'm more interested in the interactions that take place amongst the musicians, maybe the symbology within the score, maybe the theater of the actions, and they might have sonic artifacts. Sometimes that's more important to me. If it sounds like something I like to hear, that's a bonus, but a lot of times that's not my reasons for composing. And maybe that prioritizing of the other non-sonic elements might end up making it so-called experimental, but you know, they all have different functions. So it just seemed that maybe some of these were better positioned in art contexts, or there were supplemental materials to it, like the score itself, that needed to be exhibited.
Mm-hmm. Great. So another question is, thank you for sharing your work with us today. I'd love to hear more about the relationship between the formation of the performance pieces in American ledger and the visual scores that accompany and represent them. So as you were just saying, does one come before the other? If not, can you speak a little bit to your process of making them in tandem?
Yeah. Some of my earlier scores started to contain this symbology. I mean, obvious things like repeat symbols, you know, can have a narrative meaning, depending, you know, what you're saying is going to repeat. And then the more you kind of insert different shapes, different kinds of graphics, they can all take on this kind of storytelling function to them. And there was a piece we did that it was actually my final piece with Post Commodity, where we made a large sand painting type graphic score in the Carnegie Museum. And that started me thinking about just different ways of trying to make a site specific score for a community. And then having that community then enact their own story. And so that was kind of the prototype for this next American Ledger series. And for me, it's always, you know, especially with the Tulsa and the Ida B. Wells one, to do the research first and try to find a regional flag that might have this kind of dynamic to it. So in the case of the Ida B. Wells one, there was a centennial flag of Illinois, which had this very clear, you know, South versus North imagery to it. So from that, you know, using that as the basis, then there's an opportunity to start setting up the playing field, if you will. And then ultimately it's going to sound different every time. I mean, this one is going to be for women's choir and coins being thrown onto a xylophone. So depending who's involved and how many players, all of that is variable. And that's to me also the interesting part, to see what the sonic result is.
Yeah, I think this other question, I think you might have just answered it, basically saying, can you elaborate on your options for various ways to present each score? Like, I guess, like, what is the range, essentially?
Yeah, a lot of times there's no requirement for musical notation experience. Like, again, there's things like repeat symbols or maybe some rhythms, but the chances are that usually maybe somebody can help direct the conducting of that, or the performance or rehearsal of that. So I haven't had any problems of recruiting different people from different backgrounds to be able to understand how to play the score. Nothing is too complicated or virtuosic inside of that. But yeah, they take on a very variety of instrumentation. I like using voice a lot. Percussion is also something that can be used in different ways. I mean, anything can really be a percussion instrument, a trash can, you know, a block of wood. And yeah, I mean, there is still some conscious decisions on what the instrumentation and orchestration is going to be. And these things still have to be rehearsed. You know, they're not open interpretation. They still very much have a duration, a set of rules and protocols to them.
And this is asking, the next person is asking, do the rules of making each score change for each project? And then when creating the score, do you already have an idea of the result, or is the result an outcome of the composition? Like, is it something that you do and then record through essentially through the score that can then be reproduced? Or is it something that you can come up with the parameters for the score that then almost as an experiment to see what it might sound like?
Yeah, I would say all of that happens. The rules definitely change with each score, and that's usually going to be some reflection of the narrative that I might be trying to tell. You know, what were the rules or the circumstances around this event or this person's life? what did they have to negotiate or navigate through? But on the process of what you're saying there too, I think that does happen. And it even happens in my more kind of normal scores, where I might try out an idea and there's a draft of it and we play it and then something changes, or I like what, some kind of variable instruction that I want to retain, and I will just keep it as a solid instruction, something that isn't necessarily interpretable or free form. So all of that happens, if that answers the question. I think as long as it doesn't, maybe contradict the initial idea or concept of it.
So this is a question from Stephanie Smith. Could you say more about how you teach the symbolic visual language you develop for your scores to your performance collaborators? And is that different when you're working with professional musicians or non-musicians?
When I work with professional musicians, I keep the scores fairly, fairly standard notation. There's some graphics I've used, for instance, direction of bowing, if you're playing a violin or something, circular bowing, things like that, or other kinds of maybe form, like jumping around a score. But other than that, I keep that language fairly standard, because they already know a language. And I know the same language. We might as well speak in that language. On the other hand, for non-musicians, or maybe I'm working with visual artists, and that's when I might be able to elaborate more on what these symbols mean, to be able to have a discussion with the collaborators about the event or narrative that we're talking about, really to bounce ideas off them too, because they're the ones enacting it. That was definitely the one with the Tulsa score. Thinking about, okay, if I have a drumstick and I want to play, and then I want to pass it to somebody, what does that mean? How, is there some kind of generosity there, or has it become a competition? All of that had to be acted out first, and became a complete collaboration to see how it would even work, or if it would work. So the idea was there, but I had no idea if it would make sense or be possible until we did it.
Cool. Well, we're right at about an hour. So thank you so much for being so generous about sharing your practice with us. And thanks to everybody else for joining us today. And a few students will be lucky enough to get a little bit more time with you later this week. So thanks again.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye, everyone.